All right, we have a full panel here today. Hi everyone, my name is Kat Blake and I'm the Senior Program Manager here at Next Century Cities. I want to thank all of you for being here and thank all of our panelists as well. We have a really exciting group here and I can't wait to talk to them all. I'm going to structure this panel in a series of flash rounds, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions and everyone's going to have a chance to answer just due to the group of people we have here. I want to make sure everyone has time to speak. And I'm also going to let folks do quick self-intros just for the sake of time here. But at Next Century Cities, we talk a lot about how there is no one-size-fits-all model for connectivity across the country. Due to things like local economy and topography and a variety of other factors, often when communities are left behind, we see that it is the communities that take the initiative to come up with a connectivity solution that works for them. So here today we have a wonderful group of people representing either communities that they work with or a sort of technology or infrastructure solution but they are all here to talk about how we can empower communities to get connected and that community-driven connectivity. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in and I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, their name and organization, and then tell a little bit of your story, either about your community's connectivity model or the model or infrastructure that you're here to talk about today. So Claude or Bruce, do you have a preference? Claude.
Go ahead, Claude. All right, I guess that means me. Okay. Hi, I'm Claude Aiken. I'm the president and CEO of WISPA. Our organization represents entrepreneurs and innovators in the broadband space, primarily those who are using fixed wireless technology to either connect communities for the first time or provide a competitive connection over incumbents. So the companies that are members of WISPA are typically very, very small, 10 employees or fewer, very few subscribers. They're really community-based companies who have started up out of a frustration of a lack of broadband in their community. Many of our members have started their businesses out of credit card debt or loans from family members, and we have about 800 members dotting the United States who are dedicated to closing the digital divide as best they know how.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Mariel Triggs. I'm the CEO of a nonprofit, MuralNet. And what we do is we help tribal communities deploy their own fixed wireless networks. We also try to remove all the barriers that get in their way from doing this, whether it's policy issues or tech or cost. We use open source software, things of that sort. We're based out of the Silicon Valley, and we've been around for 3 years. And currently our focus right now is in the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, that mid-band spectrum, getting the word out about the rural tribal priority window. Essentially, tribal communities will be able to claim the unlicensed spectrum over their own lands, but they have until August 3rd.
Hi, my name is Ophelia Wodahamaji Corliss. I am a councilwoman for the Havasupai tribe. We have a self-deployed network. It's an LTE network that currently serves 35 to 40 CPEs. And we are part of that underlying anger, and we had to figure out what we needed to do ourselves for our own people. I have 423 permanent residents that live at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. We are the most isolated Native American tribe in the lower 48 states.
Hi, I'm Michael Calabrese. I direct the Wireless Future project at the Open Technology Institute at New America. So I'm a bit of an odd person out because we're not deploying anything in the real world, but we are a policy institute that's helping, we hope, to fuel all these folks. And the panel is we're on our own for infrastructure, and we think we can make that an advantage if we have the right tools. So what we're all about is promoting more spectrum as infrastructure. access to the public airwaves. So the public owns the airwaves, and so what we've been doing for many years is trying to make more and more of it available for unlicensed use and for free, coordinated, shared use. And that's incredibly valuable to all these efforts. It's certainly, most of the connectivity that Claude's small rural ISPs are using. It also, can fuel municipal networks, public hotspots and inclusion programs, such as, lighting up public housing projects, and the homework gap using the unlicensed TV white space that's been proven successful. It also is essential to schools, because increasingly schools have fiber, but they have to distribute that gigabit connectivity around the building, because not every student can be plugged into the wall, and then finally making connectivity affordable for everyone and solving that same, gigabit bottleneck to the home and small business as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Richardson. I am the incoming Director of Urban Innovation at the National League of Cities, but I am currently wearing my Chief of Staff hat to Mayor Andy Berke in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so, as many of y'all know, if you don't know Chattanooga for the choo-choo, you probably know us for our internet. We have the fastest, cheapest, most pervasive internet in the world, gigabit speed that goes to every home and every business. It's municipally owned and operated. And our partners over at EPB have been doing a lot of interesting work with rural co-ops across the country, trying to provide technical support, advice, even shared services. So developing new models where co-ops can work together to defray some of that upfront cost. My work in the city has really revolved around, okay, we have the gig, now what do we do with it? How do we leverage this to be a tool for digital equity, to wire schools, and provide mesh networks or other things that may allow communities that, even though they have access, they don't actually have the resources to plug into the network. And so I'm excited to have a conversation with the panel.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bruce Patterson. I'm the Technology Director for the City of Ammon. We started in 2008. There's a lot of history, but probably what we're most known for at this point is we're open access. We're an automated network, fiber to the home. We use improvement districts to do that, so the city has no debt associated with the fiber to the home project. Cost to connect in City of Ammon involves a $16.50 a month maintenance fee to the fiber, and we have gig available for $9.99 from a provider on there. So we have 4 providers. So we have residents that get 1 gig connectivity for $26.50 a month, no data cap and no contract.
Great. Thank you all. So I'd like to dig in a little bit more on each of these perspectives for this next round, and I'd love to hear from each of you what role you think either the network or the model or technology you're talking about plays in this ecosystem of connectivity. So why is community empowerment through either a WISP or a municipal network or unlicensed Wi-Fi use, unlicensed spectrum, key to closing the digital divide, and why do we need to empower that model or technology in order to get everyone connected?
Starting with me again?
Go for it.
All right. So, I think historically the way we've looked at connectivity policy, through the eyes of universal service, it's been about getting larger companies to go into areas that they otherwise wouldn't have gone to. I think there's a recognition now that we kind of need to flip that thinking on its head and enable, small providers and communities to be able to, leverage resources to be able to, connect the people they know best because they're in that community, they know the needs of that community. And those are the providers that we represent. So what does that mean from a policy standpoint? That means, when you're talking about, subsidy support, streamlining, allowing all comers to partake and not just the largest providers. Same thing on radio spectrum. If enough radio spectrum were made available on terms that made sense to communities and smaller providers, you could easily have gigabit wireless in addition to gigabit fiber and have competition that way as well. There are immense possibilities that we are kind of just beginning to tap through smart policy, and that's kind of what we at WISPA are focused on, is kind of enabling that ecosystem of small providers and entrepreneurs to succeed.
I feel like you're handing off a baton.
Just trying to tee you up.
And I'm going to do the same here. When it comes to connecting, one thing that got me into this work is I was getting tired of market forces being used in order to solve connectivity issues in places where market forces have not been able to reach. And it just seems odd. I mean, we have this hammer and we keep trying to drive in things that aren't nails. And the people who live in the communities themselves that for whatever reason are perceived to have no ROI, they're the ones who are going to know how to connect themselves, what to do with it. And it goes both ways. Not only are they going to be the most likely to be able to make sustainable models in their communities in order to bring broadband to their people, the rest of the world can learn from them. And that's one thing I really want to flip when I talk about our work, with connecting Indian country and Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is getting a lot out of this. One of our first partners, who will remain nameless, they were the beta testers for this open source software that were supposed to be able to connect everyone around the world to using fixed wireless. So imagine that you will be able to go on GitHub, which you can now. It's called Magma, but it's actually put out by Facebook. And you can download it, and if you can basically log into your router and lock out your kids, you can run one of these networks. Not that's what you should do, but... Now what's special about this is the beta testers were sitting right next to me. And if you're going to optimize a software to be able to work for anyone across the world, then you shouldn't be optimizing it in Silicon Valley. You shouldn't be using it and sandboxing just with the people within your community. You need to go to the folks that are living very different lives than you. And from there, you can be able to get the difference that you need in order to make tools that will be able to fit many, many different people. And the other part of it is, what I'm saying is a lot of our community partners, they want to form their own ISPs. And that's great. But some want to incorporate into utilities. Some start some really innovative community networks. And what my point there is, the rest of the world can learn about other ways you can make sustainable networks that aren't necessarily based on market forces and just ISP models. So that's where I see our solution being helpful, is that we're simply enabling tribal partners to be able to share their wisdom with the rest of the world.
That's great. And if I could jump in here, Ophelia, as you take this next, I would love for you to share some more details about your community's network. You mentioned CPEs. If you could talk a little bit about what those are, the homes that you're connecting, and how the network has impacted your community.
So to answer the first question is opportunity for forgotten people, and that's Native Americans. I've been observing the discussions today, urban versus rural, urban and rural. Thanks for the 2 honorable mentions about Native American statistics, but there was only one person here today that said urban, rural, and tribal. If you don't start including us in your discussions, you're continuing to let us fail. So first off, we have a self-deployed network down in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. People seem to love it out here. To tell you the truth, we only have 7 CPEs that have been able to clock broadband speeds, and they have a line of sight with the tower that we use. We do have 35 to 40 CPEs for customer premises equipment. I just call them modems, or the white box for the community. We've been using BiCells, the LTE network, and we've got SIM cards. And I have them all registered with the SIM cards in case we need technical assistance, which is provided. And we've been able to get a lot of compliance and a lot of use down at the bottom of the canyon. We have been very far from universities and schools and have been left out of opportunity that everyone else around us has been able to participate in. Online schooling, telemedicine, and emergency communications are all a part of the goals and the vision of taking the pilot network that we created and turning it into a community network for all 423 permanent residents down at the bottom of the canyon. I had to come to the FCC and lobby them for a permanent license for EBS Spectrum Channel A because all I had was a temporary authorization. When we saw the opportunities that EBS could provide us, I had to come to the FCC and lobby them and tell them our story. We don't fit into your cookie cutter thought process, and that's pretty much what every single 5 of the commissioners and their staffers were able to say back to me, that SUPI just doesn't fit what they thought was out there. And we were also able to, at the same time, February 2019, use us as the example of these are, and this is what the tribal digital divide looks like. Please allow us to have access to the tribal priority rights in the sky over our reservation lands and have tribal priority windows. I believe it was our story that helped enforce the idea of having tribal priority windows be open. Thank you for extending that for 6 months rather than having it be open for 60 days. A self-deployment model may be what you need for your community. It may be what you need for your people, and it's relatively cheap.
So I'll give an example of, I guess, of self-deployment on a small but widespread scale that I think you're all familiar with. That is going to depend on a huge increase in access to the airwaves, and that's Wi-Fi for schools, for libraries, for public health centers, community technology centers, public housing, and so on. Because right now there's been a big effort made through E-rate, for example, funding these Category 2 expenditures on internal connections, meaning mostly Wi-Fi, over I think a 3-year period up through 2018, something like $3 billion was spent on that. But we have a 5G world coming soon, as Commissioner Rosenworcel said. It's perhaps overhyped, but there are but the mobile carriers are deploying this commercially, and there'll be a lot of need for very high bandwidth within all these institutions. But right now, Wi-Fi is on limited and congested channels, and so the Federal Communications Commission's existing proceeding to open the entire 6 gigahertz band for the next generation of Wi-Fi. This is Wi-Fi 6, which will have the same capabilities essentially as 5G. You're going to need that to distribute the connectivity all throughout these schools and libraries and so on. And that's, when I mentioned that $3 billion E-rate, that's, I think, 45,000 schools that made those Wi-Fi upgrades, and more than 3,000 libraries. And they're not going to be able to push that connectivity around these places, effectively deploy it for the best use for education and for the community without having that additional spectrum bandwidth available. And right now, a handful of utilities are standing in the way of that. So we need all you, particularly those of you who come from municipalities, to pay attention to this.
So the question was about our model and why it's important to the sort of broader conversation. To me, I think the Chattanooga model is based on the fundamental idea that the internet is infrastructure. And in this country, we've invested in infrastructure top down, and we've invested bottom up, and we believe that bottom up is the right approach, and to let local communities decide the best way to do that, and then give them resources and support and build regulations that make that possible and make it make sense. So I think everybody in this room would agree with that. I think that sort of goes to the bipartisan nature of this. It is infrastructure, and trust local officials, local communities, and local leaders to make the decisions for themselves on the best way to serve their residents. And I think that's what the Chattanooga model showcases. And that's one way for us, but I think there are plenty of people who are showing it can be public-private, it can be wholly municipal, it can be locally deployed, and they're the best people to make the decision.
I think a lot of what we would say in Ammon mirrors some of what you heard from Chattanooga. I think that we view ourselves as kind of a small section, a slice, an experiment that you can see what you can do when you create an infrastructure that's just an open marketplace. And that's how we got the pricing we got. And I think it's interesting, too, because it taught us a lot about how we got where we are. Because we have to remember that we had purpose-built networks, one that did voice, another that did television broadcasting. And through this advent of the internet, all of a sudden these two monopoly infrastructures started to compete. But they were designed and funded as monopolies, never intended to compete. And then we bring in wireless. And we have all this infrastructure that now the subscriber sees as doing exactly the same thing, and they all compete. So what we really need is a strategy, because there's really a place for every single thing we're talking about here in what we need tomorrow. But we have to find a strategy that says, how do we get there? What does this look like? And I think that's the one thing that Ammon can say, is that we're starting to understand that better. We're starting to understand how to change the incentives. We're not an ISP. It was a huge learning curve for us to bring on service providers and understand how do they get comfortable with this infrastructure with us. How do we start to do this? What does the pricing look like? Who takes care of what? These are really important questions, and I think those are things that we feel like are important, that we're here not because we need a bunch of help. I think we feel like we know what we're doing at this stage and we're comfortable with that, but we're here because we feel like we can contribute some of that information to the larger good.
Yeah, and I'd actually like to follow up on that, Bruce. What would this look like in a community? And I'd like to ask you a little bit more about what that looks like in Ammon, and if you might talk about your particularly innovative financing model for the network and how that has built out the infrastructure in Ammon.
Sure, it was a huge issue for us because we didn't have an electric utility. A lot of the municipalities will tell you we built it off our electric utility, and that's generally because they already had fiber to talk to their substations, right? So it was a logical step. We have this baseline infrastructure, a core network, so we can just extend off of that. So it reduced a lot of their costs. We didn't have that. So we started talking about how does it get funded? Well, let's be honest, we're all paying for it. Whatever connection you're using, you're paying for the infrastructure. And the more we divide people amongst all this different infrastructure, the more it's going to cost us. And that is somewhat unique to us as a country because, again, how we got where we are. Some other countries don't have exactly that same issue because they didn't start building infrastructure until the internet was already here. So we looked at it and said, if the end user's paying for it, can we show them that if they make the investment and they have the control and ownership of that fiber connection, they can drive their price down? In other words, yes, it's a steep upfront investment, but it pays for itself over time. And not only that, it has a value add to the community that are not measurable in the sense of we're better connected. They can apply for jobs. They can do their online. There are all these other benefits that are indirect that they enjoy from making the investment in their property and paying for their own fiber. So we've been successful with that so far. Our take rate averages around 60%. We have certain areas of town that it's over 90%, but our overall average is 60% of the people that we pass take the Ammon fiber service, and they pay over $3,000 up front to get that, whether we use the LID process and they pay over time or they just pay up front.
Thank you. So my next question for the group is, we've heard a lot about the potential of each of these models. I'd like to hear more now, and we've touched on this a bit, about what your biggest challenge is for each of you in implementing this model, either in your community or in making the model more available throughout the country. And anyone can start. We can continue to go down the line. Sure. Bruce.
Oh, I'm excited to take this one if I can.
Sure.
I'm going to tell you point blank, biggest challenge is the same challenge we have as a country, consensus. Agreeing on the strategy, that's the biggest challenge. Because there's a tremendous amount of noise, and let's be honest, this to the average consumer, this is a very complicated question. And if you look at all the forces at play, obfuscation plays into the hands of the people that are in play. We heard about mapping data, we've heard about other data. We need to get more concise with the messaging. We need to present clearer choices. And for us, that's the biggest barrier, was actually getting people to understand the strategy, to get consensus, to get everybody to agree that this makes sense for all of us, because one person can't fix it. It takes all of us to do it, and we've heard that here. So I think that's our biggest challenge.
Anyone else?
I can go. So I'd say the biggest challenge for Chattanooga when we started this was probably the ones you would think about: large capital investment, something people aren't necessarily familiar with, all the things that when cities try to deploy, they run into. Now, and we've had, lots of challenges over the years trying to expand our network. I'm sure some people in this room have heard about, our preemption battles that we've had. But now I think we've really focused on how can we tell our story and leverage the investment that the federal government made in Chattanooga to bring more communities online and increase the impact of that investment, whether that's shared services models or other things. And I think the data plays a huge part in helping us figure out how to do that well, how to measure the impact that we're having. And I think we need better standardization. I think we need to be clear about what we're actually talking about with people. But I think I wholeheartedly agree with your original point that the problem is consensus. Like if you're asking what the problem is for all these models becoming a reality, it's that we as a country have to fundamentally believe that the internet is infrastructure and we're going to value it that way. And so I think it's up to us to sort of continue to be staunch advocates for that across the country, or all of these models are going to have issues as they continue to mature.
Okay. And again, I'm a bit different because we're not about deployment, but about trying to, provide more access to the public airwaves, more open access, to fuel this the internet as infrastructure. So in terms of the biggest challenge, it's really entrenched interests. We've gotten to a point in you might say the politics of spectrum, where the only way you can get more that you can unlock more unlicensed bandwidth or get more shared spectrum for the rural and tribal fixed wireless providers, for example, is by sharing bands. So when I mentioned the 6 gigahertz band for next generation Wi-Fi, that's a band that's already occupied primarily by fixed point-to-point links. Or Claude and I are fighting on this C-band, which is satellite operators occupy it, and no matter what band of spectrum you're talking about, it's all occupied, and the incumbents don't want to give it up, or if they want, and they don't want to share because it might create the slightest bit of risk, or increasingly because they think they can get paid off, like the satellite operators in C-band. So as I mentioned, maybe prematurely on 6 gigahertz, we face, the utilities saying the sky is falling if people turn on super low power Wi-Fi inside their home, a few kilometers away from where they have a point-to-point link or something. So overcoming that's increasingly difficult. And then on top of that, we have the folks who are very powerful in Washington, both the mobile carriers and Congress, who make money only off spectrum auctions. So to the extent you can clear some space in the airwaves, they either want to exclusively control it, the mobile carriers, or the Congress wants to make money from it that they can spend on something. So it is a tough battle, but it's great that we have some very broad coalitions working on it, including Next Century Cities, that I hope you all will become more active on.
And enter the 2.5 gigahertz auctions happening that we had to fight for tribal priority windows, which should be a sovereign right, that tribes should be able to already own the spectrum above their reservation lands without applying for it. Thank you very much. So some of the issues we've run into are there was no competition out near Havasupai. There's no infrastructure. Nobody wanted to deal with us. They're not going to make back the money that they're going to have to invest to bring anything out to the middle of nowhere. So we were finally able to find a trustworthy partner who didn't lie to us, because we had already been going through 15 years of being told that they're going to bring telemedicine out to us to Supai, and that it would be the best. You know what would be so good for you, because you live at the bottom of the Grand Canyon? Telemedicine, telemedicine, telemedicine. Well, 15 years of their equipment collecting dust and nobody could come through. It was a really hard sell to get Tribal Council to pass a resolution to be able to partner with MuralNet to be able to move forward. And when we were able to finally put the application in for EBS, we had to wait. We turned it in August 2017, got a response back February 2018, and then they froze EBS at the end of April. We squeezed right in somehow, and that was a miracle in of itself. And so, and then after that, we need technical support and we need help to be able to run this, and we have a partner who's been able to do that for us. So the community has been helpful. My colleagues on Tribal Council have been helpful. MuralNet has been very helpful. And coming up on 3 years here very soon, working on this issue, I think Mariel will agree that policy has actually been one of our biggest headaches in trying to be able to obtain permanent licenses for EBS. And then when we first got the original STA, they changed what EBS was going to be and become. So we had to wait for a 2-year freeze working on STAs and able just to beg and get, and thank you for listening to me, FCC, just to get that permanent EBS Channel A. Now we have tribal priority windows. We have a vision. The first time we were able to join a satellite class was September 2018. That's not that long ago.
And it was an algebra course, if I'm right.
Yes, ma'am.
I used to teach algebra, so that makes me happy. That's the first time I got to do real time with the teacher. And yeah, I do agree with you. I mean, the tech actually ended up being trivial. Silicon Valley, we developed apps. We thought that was the issue. We made a network in a box package that worked. Great, we solved the rural digital divide. And then no, that wasn't the case. You know, the physics are there, the tech is there. Policy was the fight. And Ophelia's right. She turned it around when she was able to talk directly with the FCC. And the more I think about it, the FCC Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, they're fighting hard actually right now to get the word out about this rural tribal priority window. And when I think about what's making things stop, it's the policy, but the reason why the policy is stopping is because they didn't understand what was going on in rural tribal lands until Councilwoman Ophelia Wadahamaji-Corliss went in and told them. And if we could get the people out and hearing each other's stories and getting out of the cities so they can see what life is like elsewhere, I think that empathy would develop and that understanding so that the people who are making the rules will go ahead and make sure that it's working for everyone. Maybe I'm a little Pollyanna about that. But what I do find is, yes, policy is the issue. One, because it does seem to try to protect incumbents first and foremost. That's interesting. And two, the people who are writing the rules do not necessarily know how it's going to affect the communities whose voices are unheard.
Yeah, I would just have to echo what, the folks who've gone before have already said. I think policy tends to be the biggest issue. I mean, look, most of our folks use fixed wireless or hybrid fiber fixed wireless to get service out there. Historically, the way subsidy programs have, been designed, they're designed with, a particular technology or a particular incumbency in mind, and overcoming that can be, a really difficult fight. Likewise, on the radio spectrum side of things, I think the debate over C-band is a great example. Several years back, we proposed to the FCC, hey, there's this 500 megahertz of satellite spectrum that's being underutilized. With a couple word changes in the FCC's rules, you could have multiple gigabit speed fixed wireless providers competing all across the United States. Fast forward, a couple years now we're debating over how much is going to get parceled off and auctioned off for mobile use, how much satellite providers are going to get paid for that, and at the end of the day, we've kind of lost sight to some extent about what we're actually trying to enable with smart spectrum policy. It can be a huge challenge to try to move the ball forward in Washington on smart policy that makes sense for entrepreneurs, for small business, just because of the entrenched interests that you tend to be up against. So I would just agree with what the panel has more eloquently than I said previously.
Wonderful. So I'm going to ask one last question, and then I will open it up to the panel for any closing remarks if folks want to think on that. But y'all have really teed me up perfectly for my last question, so I thank you for that. And I think what you're saying is profound, that it's often not a technology problem, but a policy issue. So I'd like to ask each of you, what would you say either to the folks in this room or the folks watching the live stream and other policymakers? What's on your wish list? What can policymakers and other stakeholders do to support your work?
I'll go first, so none of the good answers get taken. Just listen. Like, people have solutions. People are working on this issue. They've been advocating for years. Cities, towns, rural communities, tribal communities. People need access to this, and they have solutions, and we just need policymakers to listen to us and really listen. I think visit these communities, see the work on the ground, and I think from that, then lots of solutions are out there and can be adopted and spread and supported.
Anyone else want to tackle that?
And I would say very similar. The local solution is probably going to be the one that works, because the state and the federal government, they can't fix it for everybody. So you really want everybody at the table, because there's a place for the incumbents, and there's a place for the wireless, and there's a place for the municipality. But what you have to do is frame the incentives, and that's what the policy should do, is just frame the incentives. It shouldn't pick the winners and losers. It should frame the incentives. And that's a big, big challenge. And I think in Ammon we recognize that, but that's what I would say is keep everybody at the table and focus on framing the incentives. Don't pick the winners and losers.
I can offer, I guess, a couple specific items, that I've already mentioned, just because they're so close to their culmination at the FCC, and that is, as I mentioned, the unlicensed bandwidth that next generation Wi-Fi needs to remain at the center of a 5G wireless ecosystem. All that bandwidth you need for the schools and libraries and all these services is really hangs on opening the 6 gigahertz band for unlicensed sharing across the entire band, all 1,200 megahertz, and the FCC may decide on that in the next 1 to 2 months, so weigh in. And similarly, as Claude mentioned, this C-band, in all the wrangling over auction money, we're forgetting that at least 200 megahertz at the top, which is a huge amount of spectrum, that's multi-gigabit, is available for high-capacity fixed wireless use, as long as you coordinate free of charge in over at least 80% of the U.S. almost immediately, just by coordinating based on the location of these earth stations. And the FCC needs to authorize that, but it's been pushed to the side, and we need to light a fire. So that's the other item on the wish list.
I have a few. Include us in your conversation. You have to add tribal into the equation. You have to add it into the title, and then you can get into your specified conversations, your specialty. But when you only say urban and rural, you are continuing to let us fail. Secondly, I hear there's an act coming out trying to target the tribal digital divide. I'm just asking when it does come out. Please support it. Please have your congressmen and women support it. And I had a third one, but I honestly forgot what it was. Thanks.
You can cut into me when it comes back to you, because that's how it works, right? A week ago, I was on Wind River Reservation, Wyoming, freezing. I'm from California, born and bred, so I did not know those kind of temperatures existed. And I had to replace a 2.5 network with a 3.65 in order to meet the policy needs that were happening in the situation. And it just seemed strange because no one was using the spectrum. There was going to be no interference. There was no logical or physical reason why this should happen. And yet there I was, cold, and trying to undo a nut with wondering oh, this is what gloves are for. And I would say design around those who are the hardest to connect. we think of curb cuts. They're put into sidewalks in order to make sure that people in wheelchairs can get up onto the sidewalk and not be hit by oncoming traffic and things of that sort. And how many of us use curb cuts? I use it when I'm biking. I use when I'm pushing a stroller. I mean, if you make something available for those who are the hardest to reach, that probably means it's going to reach everybody in between.
Yeah, I would just add to that, design around the people who are hardest to connect, but also design around, companies and communities who are actively trying to make a difference and are making a difference. I think, I've said this before, I think one of the challenges in representing, entrepreneurs and innovators here in DC is just your voice gets drowned out awful quickly. So, continuing to, think critically, follow the work of people who are really working to, affect positive change. And I think that's a, a really fantastic start, that reminded me of a visit that I had with a member out in rural West Virginia. And if you know West Virginia, one thing that it's famous for is for having really lackluster wireless service. So I'm visiting one of our members who provides service via fixed wireless, high-speed broadband, and he tells me there's about over a gigahertz of licensed spectrum right above me right now. I could be offering multi-gigabit speed service, but every single one of those entities that holds that spectrum is not using it here now. And that just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, does anyone have any closing remarks or something that maybe I should have asked you but I didn't, about how we can get all of our communities connected? No last words?
The only thing I'll say, and I'm sure everybody on the panel echoes this, is the importance of organizations like Next Century Cities that create spaces like this for us to all continue to talk and share ideas. And so thank you all for putting this together, and I hope we continue this conversation through this organization and others that are doing really good work in the space.
No one else, then I'll just say how hopeful panels like this make me. I appreciate that so many folks have done the work to show us that there is a way forward. Our conversation has helped light that fire under all of us to just do the work to get it done. So thank you all for being here, and please join me in thanking our panelists.